Hello, 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 hello.
Good evening to all those joining in for the webinar today. Good evening to participants from India, and good morning, good afternoon to those joining from the US and Europe. We welcome you to our webinar, Stewardship Can Accelerate Efforts to Combat AMR, by CCAMP as part of its activity as part of the CARBEX Global Accelerator Network. We've had talks and webinars in the past on the emerging health crisis brought on by the silent epidemic of antimicrobial resistance, and have heard experts from the field share their insights with the audience. According to a recent Lancet publication with data from about 204 countries, drug-resistant infections killed 1.27 million people in 2019. And this is more than many widely recognized causes of death, such as malaria and HIV/AIDS. A majority of these deaths were reported from sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Despite the Global Action Plan and the country-specific National Action Plan against AMR, the on-ground impact in mitigating the causes and spread of resistant microbes still remains to be seen. The role of stewardship in the integration of appropriate interventions for last mile impact has been highlighted time and again. So today we have our esteemed speakers, Rose Garson of CARBEX and Dr. Taslim Arif Sayed from CCAMP to share their insights on this very important topic. Please join me in welcoming both our speakers. Introducing our speakers, Ms. Rose Garson is the compliance manager at CARBEX, and as part of her role at CARBEX, Rose conducts due diligence on applicant and portfolio companies and ensures adherence to funded terms and conditions, with a particular focus on research, compliance, and stewardship and access. She has a JD from Boston University School of Law and an LLM from Osgoode Hall Law School. Introducing our second speaker, Dr. Taslim Arif Sayed is the CEO and Director at CCAMP and is actively involved in promoting innovation in life science healthcare by supporting translation of discoveries to application, entrepreneurship, and technology development. He also heads the Discovery to Innovation Accelerator program at CCAMP. His initial training has been in neurosciences from Max Planck Institute for Brain Research, Germany, followed by postdoctoral training at University of California, San Francisco. Without much delay, I would first like to request Dr. Taslim Arif to set the context for the need for stewardship in AMR and to highlight some of CCAMP's work in this direction. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, based on the geographies that you are available. And, of course, a warm welcome to Rose Garson for this particular seminar. Thank you for joining today. Friends, thanks for joining today for this very important, aspect of antimicrobial resistance and the critical role played in AMR, fighting AMR by the antibiotic stewardship. Just to give you a context very clearly, some of the infographics that we all know about, but just to give you a perspective of an AMR, which is a global health threat, Just look at this mortality per 10,000 population here. And the way it grows towards, light blue to dark blue to purplish, the severity actually goes further and further. This entire continent, largely, starting from possibly Eastern Europe and further on, and already Africa look really terribly bad. And if you, the mention of paper, even in those mentions, the LMICs are still critically, affected by the impact of AMR, and the numbers are still not yet well, counted on and pointed out. So AMR is a huge problem, and we do know that we have to work. And in terms of the social development goals, it's not only about threat of health, but it's also about where else does it impact. It is AMR could push additionally 24 million people into extreme poverty by 2030, which is more or less 8 years down the line. The zero hunger objective would have a huge impact if by loss of almost 70% productivity in terms of because of high AMR in animal and protein health and so on. The good health and well-being, of course, we know about it. And the inequality, how the different economic growth will be impacted, and decent work and economic growth would have another total loss of around $3.4 trillion would happen to GDPs by AMR. And this is within next 8 years, what we're talking about. This is huge impact. And we all know about the projected loss that we are looking at. If today, some of the numbers that we have said are somewhere around 700,000 to 1.2 million, we're looking at almost 10 million deaths every year by 2050. And this may be even be higher. And collectively, what we all want is to reduce it by several, efforts. One of the crucial effort, which actually causes the, building up of the AMR, is the inappropriate use of antibiotics. And if you just look at some of the work that the CDC has put out, the antibiotic stewardship is actually an effort to build how antibiotics are to be used, prescribed by clinicians and used by patients. Improving the prescription habits and use is critical to effectively treat infections, protect patients from harms caused by unnecessary antibiotic use, and combat the antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic stewardship means different levels of engagement in different countries. Countries possibly like India, where while antibiotics are banned to be provided by pharmacy without a prescription, they are easily available and that we all know about. That is the biggest gap for India and possibly many other countries in terms of availability of antibiotics for human use and possibly even for non-human use per se. It is a huge issue. And I think we collectively, what we need to do is to take actions, multi-directional efforts to limit the use of antibiotics, inappropriate use of antibiotics as we go forward. At CCAM, what we aim to do largely is, build, support research and innovation which allow the efforts to tackle AMR. Of course, at the same time, have awareness and capacity building for many aspects of AMR fight and establish partnerships with stakeholders who can then help in terms of tackling the spread of AMR. Of course, CCAM has been delighted to be selected by Carbex in the Global Accelerator Network. The top 10 world-class accelerators were chosen a couple of years before, and CCAM was delighted to be part of this elite group to work with these accelerators and utilize and leverage the ecosystem together to ensure that the innovations we are building who could have implications in terms of tackling AMR in multiple folds, be it therapeutics, diagnostics, prevention of infections, and somewhere also innovations which would support AMR stewardship. In this, just to give you a perspective, we do a lot of programs in addition to CARB-X. One is the CCAM AMR Quest, again, which is in collaboration with CARB-X, and followed up by the CCAM AMR Accelerator program. For last 2 years, we have been building this effort, and we have many innovations which are now being taken forward in the field of AMR. As I mentioned, we have many innovations. A few of them are in prevention of infection, diagnostics, and of course, new drugs which are there. We have even further, so we have possibly now around 30 odd innovations working in AMR at different sites of diagnostics, prevention, and new drugs. Today, I will not go into this, but we are very happy that 3 of these companies are already supported by CARB-X. The only 3 companies supporting in Asia are all with CCAM. This is Bergworks, Kangagen, and Achira Labs. Module Innovations. I take it back. Very importantly, while we do a lot in things, ensure that the better tracking of antibiotic prescription and innovations that we are looking to support futuristically in terms of better tracking of supply chain, better compliance in terms of prescription at the pharmacy level, and how information technology, IoT, and blockchain could do that. The continuum from diagnostic to antimicrobial stewardship is very, very crucial and something I would like to expand today. From a perspective of the clinical evaluation for the patient, where one understands through the diagnostic test, one understands the infection, and sometimes based on that, how the antibiotics are recommended, and how do you actually could have a very precise use of antibiotics. One of the biggest challenge in many geographies, and possibly all geographies, but more so in some countries, has been the time taken between early assessment and the evaluation of the infection and the antibiotic susceptibility, and the right understanding of which antibiotics would work against the resistance or not. Sometimes this takes 48 to 72 hours, and this is where a lot of inappropriate use of antibiotics have been done, and LMICs where people want to continue on their daily work, do not want to wait, want to get treated as soon as so that they can do their daily wages and get bread home. This is where the highest use of antibiotics is happening. Self-medication is also there. So if we have diagnostics which would allow quick, rapid, low-cost detection of pathogen, and similarly low-cost, affordable, rapid antibiotic susceptibility tests, these capabilities, both in LMICs as well as other countries, could do a significant change in terms of how antibiotic prescriptions are happening. Some of the companies I'll talk about, not all today, who are working on this. One is SpotSense, which is working on companion diagnostics for sepsis, more so in neonatal sepsis, where they have now the ability to use saliva to understand the inflammation levels in young kids and now in adults as well, in response to the prescriptions or the treatment given. This is very important to understand whether provided medication is helping to take care of the infection and health, bringing down the inflammation. This is about to go to market very soon and would be very exciting, more so for neonates, so that doctors can take accordingly understand which treatments are working for the neonates and so on. We also have companies like Module Innovations doing fantastic work. And I see that Sachin was here in the seminar as well, doing fantastic work both in terms of early diagnosis for urinary tract infections, which is rapid, as well as building on something which is for antibiotic susceptibility test. such point of care rapid tools could be phenomenally useful to support the physicians to identify infection and also identify which antibiotic is working and then go further on that. Another work from CCAM is a platform technology which again allows rapid detection or rapid susceptibility test, starting from the urinary samples for UTIs within 5 hours. So while we're talking about 48 hours, the ability to do within 5 hours from sample to telling you which antibiotic to use could actually be a game changer in terms of how we can build a much tighter regime to take care of the use of antibiotics and the right antibiotics to people. Similar one, another company which is working is Edivo, which is using an optoelectronics capability for early disease detection, more so in terms of wound care or the diabetic wounds, and understand how and also build an AST for susceptibility within 6 hours. These are exciting efforts in addition to the global efforts which are happening to ensure that those efforts are going. I would just possibly summarize in the interest of time that countries like India has huge challenges, and AMR is one of the biggest challenge in India and many other countries. And India will need to take on this AMR challenge by building indigenous innovations in partnership with global innovators and other stakeholders. The challenges are peculiar in nature because of the surrounding, the infrastructure, the regime, the setup, many other components in it. And hence, building indigenous innovation with global partnerships is actually one of the key and something we need to work on. And AMR stewardship could have a huge impact if we build innovations that support the efforts to tackle AMR at large. I'll stop here, but before I stop, I'll of course thank agencies supporting CCAM, including the government ministries of the federal government of India, the local state government, CARBEX, Rockefeller Foundation, and others. I'll stop here and will be happy to expand on some of the thoughts in the discussion session. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Tasleem. That was very insightful, and thanks for setting the pace for the AMR initiatives that CCAMP has already undertaken, as well as the need for stewardship in this very important domain. I would now like to request Rose to share more on CARBEX's stewardship and access plans, and how this aids to accelerate efforts for greater on-ground impact. So over to you, Rose. And just, sorry to interrupt you. And just for the audience, after the speakers have presented, we'll open the forum. So do type in your queries in the chat. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Rose, over to you.
Not a problem. Hello, everybody, and a special thank you to CCAMP for putting on this event and asking CARBEX to participate. I'm going to be speaking about CARBEX's stewardship and action initiatives today. Before delving into our particular stewardship and access activities, I'm going to give a brief overview of who we are at CARBEX and what we do. So we are a global nonprofit partnership. We focus on developing both therapeutics, preventatives, as well as diagnostics that are focused on fighting the growing threat of drug-resistant bacteria. In this effort, we have a consortium of partners who are listed on the first line of this slide. We also offer wraparound business and technical support to the companies that are in our portfolio, of which CCAMP is a part. Looking a little bit closer at our business model and the numbers so far, we aim to accelerate innovative products that are active against drug-resistant bacteria. As I mentioned, these fall within the 3 pillars of therapeutics, preventatives, and diagnostics. We hope that we're able to advance high-risk projects that will offer big impacts to potential patients. From our inception in 2016 through the end of this year, we will be investing $480 million to address the global rise of antibiotic resistance. Our scope is most particularly focused on the most serious antibiotic resistant bacteria, according to the priority pathogens as listed by the US's CDC, as well as the World Health Organization. The way we do this is that we hold global funding calls, and then we have a competitive process that ends up with the offer of non-dilutive funding to product developers to help drive innovation. Through this process, the companies that are in portfolio do assume a set percentage of cost share to support their projects. If you look in the red here, these are some of the numbers to date. Since our inception in 2016, we have had over 90 projects in portfolio. Right now, as of the middle of last month, there were 54 projects, most heavily on the therapeutics, while also having programs in preventatives and rapid diagnostics as well. Our companies in portfolio, 10 of them have moved to phase 1, with 8 of these representing first in human work. Over 90% of the therapeutics represent a novel class, and we are a global effort. There's 12 countries so far represented in our portfolio. 9 projects have graduated, with 2 going on to receive additional contracts from BARDA, which is our US government funder. The slide here represents the projects that have been in portfolio since 2016. There's been over 90, with a few familiar faces. We do have a handful of India-based companies as well. It's really important to note that all of these companies here and their programs have all signed on to the exact same contractual commitments around stewardship and access, and these follow the project and product through to the end of patent expiration. So looking a little bit more closely at our stewardship and access initiatives, we at CARB-X really believe that antibiotic sustainability is a 3-legged stool, as shown on this slide. Although we are primarily focused on innovation through our funding, we also directly support both stewardship and access to promote antibiotic stewardship. Through innovation, we believe that we'll be able to deliver new solutions to address the growing threat of drug-resistant bacteria, but these need to be accompanied by both access and stewardship. Access will support patient care and help control the spread of drug-resistant bacteria in the future, while stewardship will help reduce misuse and overuse of these innovative products to promote responsible use throughout their lifetime. One of the ways in which we address stewardship and access is that we contractually require all of our product developers to put together a stewardship and access plan. This process starts when the product enters pivotal clinical trials. This will generally be phase 3 work or the equivalent for diagnostics. And this will be a non-confidential document that the company begins to put together. At the time the company receives the first regulatory approval in a certain set of markets, this document will then be updated and publicly available on our website. The company then has to follow on and update this document when there are any significant market or product changes. An example of an event that would lead to an update would be a product label expansion or a new regulatory approval. As I mentioned before, this obligation to put together a stewardship and access plan, it survives the termination and expiration of our subaward agreement. It attaches to the product itself and follows through to the expiration of project IP rights in either the US, EU, UK, or Japan. So when we say this follows the product, this means that these requirements must be incorporated into any sale, transfer, license, assignment, or other transaction that involves the product. Our product developers must also use best reasonable efforts to comply with what they put in their stewardship and access plans at all times. In the event that CARB-X is no longer operational, Wellcome Trust is the successor to our rights if the need arises. It's also important to note that the contractual language of our subawards agreement are publicly available, and this details out the plans and the requirements for stewardship and access. If you are interested in reading this agreement, please see our website. You can find it on the additional resources of the apply page. So when we're looking at these stewardship and access plans, there's 6 elements to the plans that we asked product developers to put together. Section 1 should be a product description, which should include the intended TPP and ways in which the product could support rapid or low resource deployment. Section 2 should then identify any obstacles and constraints to stewardship and access. When working on this section, we really want to encourage product developers to think really broadly, consider both those factors that are within their control, and those that are not. So something like a market consideration or potentially a provider consideration. Then for section 3, we ask the product developers to include their strategies to make marketing approvals in a timely manner in the targeted territories. So targeted territories are those countries where the product developer intends to market the product themselves. Relevant considerations to this section would be whether there are plans to use accelerated registration mechanisms or perhaps availability mechanisms, something like the WHO pre-qualification process. Then in the fourth section, we ask our product developers to include strategies that support stewardship and access in other territories. Other territories are all those countries in which the product developer does not intend to market the product themselves. Aspects to consider in this section are pricing, partnerships, responsible promotion, as well as diagnostics requirements. For the fifth section, they should detail their strategy for exploiting the project IP rights in other territories. Things that are relevant to this section are exploring licensing or partnership arrangements with a third party to make sure that that product is available in these areas where they don't intend to market the product themselves. Finally, in the sixth section, there should be a strategy for monitoring the effectiveness of the stewardship and access initiatives that they're detailing out in their plans. This should also include a proposed metric to measure success. And when looking at success, we want to make sure product developers are looking both in the targeted territories as well as the other territories. We at Carbex were very excited to participate in an effort to put forth a development guide to help people put together these plans. This is the first practical guidance on strategies and activities that support both stewardship and access, specifically for those companies working to bring forward antibacterial products. In terms of the history that took us to this point, the contractual language for stewardship and access for our inclusion in our sub-award was first put forth in March of 2017. The following year, in March of 2018, a consensus was reached on this language across our funders with much industry input as well. The language was first publicly presented in November of 2018. Shortly thereafter, about 6 months later, Wellcome Trust, who was one of our funders, put together a collaborative effort to begin working on this document to support companies in creating these stewardship and access plans. This process was completed in January of last year, and the document was rolled out in March of 2021. We're very excited about the guide, and we hope it will serve as a useful benchmark to the broader antibacterial community as well. Just like our sub-award agreement, you could find a copy of the development guide on our website. So as I stated previously, Wellcome Trust led the collaborative group that put together this document. We participated along with many of our funders who were listed on this slide. In addition, GuardP and the Access to Medicine Foundation were involved as well. On the industry side, we received valuable input from Bio, and we really hope, along with everybody else who signed on to this guide, that it will serve to help not only our PDs, but the broader community as well, to help inform their stewardship and access initiatives. When working on this guide, there were three main goals we and the group wanted to serve. The first was to assist the Carbex product developers to write plans that fulfill the requirements of our sub-award, but also facilitate broader access to every product that we support in our portfolio. We also, and this is very crucial, wanted to make sure that companies were able to do this and sign on to these initiatives without damaging the viability or sustainability of their product in the market. The second goal is that we wanted to help product developers think very comprehensively, both and strategically, to create functional and practical plans that are appropriate to the stage of development of their product. This is the reason why a lot of our requirements kick in at a later stage of development. We want to make sure that these efforts are being spent when there is a viable product, especially because the majority of the companies we fund are small to mid-size with the average 10 to 12 to 20 employees. The third goal we hope the guide will help reach is that we can also provide additional resources, which include activities and strategies and processes that could be adopted to support these essential goals of stewardship and access. To do this, we've included additional annexes in the guide, which we hope will put people in contact with potential partnering organizations and additional guidance to help support their stewardship and access goals. In terms of the content of the development guide itself, one of the main elements is Annex B. And this Annex B, and on the slide here, you can see a screenshot of what this looks like. It's broken down to those 6 sections that we highlighted before, and they pose section by section guiding questions to product developers who are in the process of putting together the plans. So an example of the type of question we ask here. So for section 2, where you should be looking to identify any obstacles and constraints to stewardship and access, one of the questions is, whether they're unique product considerations that may present obstacles to broad and rapid product deployment. Examples of things to consider here are the availability of raw materials and their cost, as well as manufacturing or scale-up challenges. We also included additional informational annexes, which we hope will help companies go through this process. They provide contact information for potential partnering and supporting organizations. They also include other suggested early stage stewardship and access activities. The photo up on the slide here shows Annex E, which is a suggested checklist of early stage activities. Some of the things that we suggest here are committing to voluntary standards, such as the AMR Industry Alliance Roadmap, as well as connecting with GuardP to discuss potential long-term partnerships to make the product available in other territories. We at CARB-X have been very excited about some of the recent findings in the broader community. The Access to Medicine Foundation puts out a yearly benchmark report, and their report had a few very interesting stewardship and access plans related findings. So in the 2021 report, a few of the key findings were that there had been sustained progress in stewardship and access planning since they first put out their benchmark in 2018. Looking at the 20 late stage medicine projects that were within their analysis, 18 to 20 of these had both stewardship and access plans. And then looking particularly at the vaccine projects that were within the scope of their analysis, all 11 of these had access plans. This is very exciting and shows that people are starting to pay more attention to these issues and work on putting together plans. In terms of next steps, they did suggest a few additional actions. The first of which was putting together stewardship and access plans for every late stage medicine project. They also wanted to increase the access planning for vaccines, as well as the depth and breadth of these plans. In particular, they suggested that there should be increased consideration of the needs of LMICs and ensuring that all of these plans include all countries, particularly low-income countries. In addition to our stewardship and access plans, we do have a few other contractual mechanisms to help support stewardship and access. We have a commercialization plan, a voluntary mechanism for other territories, as well as access rights. So looking first at the commercialization plan, this is really viewed as a companion to the stewardship and access plan. The process for putting together this document begins a bit later on in development. It should happen within the 6-month period following first approval in either the US, EU, UK, or Japan. Within this document, we're looking for product developers to identify those targeted territories, so those countries where they intend to market the product themselves. One key difference between this document and the stewardship and access plan is that the commercialization plan will be confidential, while the stewardship and access plan will be publicly available. So because this will not be publicly posted, the level of detail we're looking for in this plan is different. So for example, in the stewardship and access plan, it would be more than enough to state that you are committed to responsible marketing and sales practices, while in this commercialization plan, we would then expect to see the details of the marketing and sales strategies in both the targeted territories and to the other territories. So as long as the product developer has put together both a stewardship and access plan and a commercialization plan, and it's progressing in line with what they put forth in these plans, access rights will not apply to targeted territories. And I'll get into the exact details of the access rights in the next couple slides here. So before turning to access rights, our agreements also provide for a voluntary mechanism for other territories. Through this process, the product developer will work with Wellcome Trust, who is one of our funding partners, to explore mechanisms to ensure that they reach stewardship and access goals in those countries where they are not marketing the product themselves. This process will work by the creation of a joint business plan to ensure that the Wellcome Trust has a mechanism to access all the IP they need to commercialize the product in the other territories. What this business plan look like could take a variety of different forms. There's a few examples on the slide. It could be a joint venture between the company and the product and Wellcome Trust. There could be a voluntary sublicense to Wellcome Trust, or Wellcome could pay a reasonable royalty to the company for those IP rights. In addition to detailing how they will put the product in other territories, this business plan will also consider the means to protect against illegal importation into high income markets. For example, this could be differentiating characteristics such as distinct branding or packaging of the product. So the company at Wellcome Trust will have 3 years following the first anniversary of the product's approval to come to an understanding and make this joint business plan work. If, however, the company and Welcome are unable to agree after these 3 years, then access rights will apply. And it's important to note that if access rights do apply in this situation, that will be only for the limited purpose of making the product available in these other territories. So the access rights that we provide for in our agreement are meant to be similar in both scope and effect to the Bayh-Dole rights that are held by the US government over inventions that they fund. These apply generally only to other territories, as we discussed above, and they apply only to project IP, which are those discoveries funded by CARB-X. However, we want to make sure that what we fund isn't just sitting on the shelf. So the access rights could also apply if a company fails to use commercially reasonable efforts to develop a product and seek regulatory approval for a period of 5 years after they've left our portfolio. And this is simply to make sure that what we have funded isn't just sitting on a shelf, and that these innovative projects are able to be pushed forward. And Welcome Trust, our funding partner, is the holder of these access rights. The exact practice and procedure for the exercise of these rights is further detailed in our sub-award agreement, which again is publicly available on the apply page of our website. So thank you, everybody, and I'd be happy to answer any questions at this point. I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Rose. Thanks for detailing out the stewardship and access guide by CARB-X. I'm sure many are, hearing about this for the very first time, and my colleague has shared the link to the guide, which is publicly available. We now open the forum for questions by the audience. So I see a few questions regarding funding. I would request that the questions be pertaining to the stewardship program, and we've done the funding aspect, but Rose, would you like to cover that very briefly, or we can?
Sure. I didn't see the exact question, but right now all of our funding is going to be earmarked for the companies in portfolio. Other funding rounds will only be possible after securing additional funding. If you're interested in seeing updates on that, you can sign up for alerts directly on the page of our website. So you'll be the first to know if there's a new call put out. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and the details for the opportunities and the funding rounds and what is the procedure, it is detailed on the website. We highly encourage you to have a look at that. Yeah, so most of the questions coming in are regarding funding. We have covered these aspects in our earlier session, so I would request the audience to direct questions regarding the stewardship program if possible. So let me ask you a question, Rose, while we be getting questions from the audience. Is you detailed out that the CARB-X stewardship and access guide would help the product developers who are currently funded, but how do you envisage it for the larger ecosystem and other innovators working in AMR to benefit from this?
Thank you for the question. So we see the development guide as not only serving our product developers, but also the broader community. It was designed to be helpful to all companies that are active in this space, not just companies within our portfolio. So our hope is that many companies will find these principles to be instructive and will voluntarily follow them to create their own stewardship and access plans.
Yeah, and you mentioned that this is open to the countries where the PDs would like to venture out into. Just kind of in a line, if you could just elaborate that as well. It's for application globally or in any specific countries.
Yes, so we definitely want to encourage stewardship and access at a global scale, but it is up to the company to decide those countries in which they want to market the product themselves, which we refer to as targeted territories. And then those markets where they do not want to sell the product themselves, the other territories where we hope they will look to partner and license to make that product available globally.
Okay. Thank you. So I have a question from Yukti. Potential magic bullets against AMR like phages. AMPs have a lot of research backup. There seems to be a huge transitional gap. What is being done to bridge this deficit? So not directly in line with the stewardship program, but anybody wants to take a shot at it, most welcome.
I can give it a shot.
Yes.
So I think the participant, it's a good question in terms of the broad aspects of AMR candidates that would serve both either bacteriophages or antimicrobial peptides. One thing that we do know that early stage work that happens in academia and then which then gets translated to be taken as a development towards a candidate, there's definitely a huge gap. And one of the effort that we are doing with Carbex, and in addition to other efforts that we have on AMR, I think is to identify those exciting work from academic groups early on and support them through translation. So Carbex, one thing that I don't know whether people know about it, but Carbex is not necessarily only for for-profit startups. It also supports larger groups in academic setup as well, and which have the translation component going. So if there are academic groups who are interested in taking their early work on bacteriophages, antimicrobial peptides, or any other effort, and want support, not only through funding support, but also through support in terms of the repository of the pathogens, in support from perspective of access to CROs, support in terms of access to experts and mentors and other ecosystem players, and understanding of regulatory. I think Carbex setup, which I'm sure Rose would be able to say in much more detail-wise, as well as some of the efforts at CCAM, could actually support that and take this translation gap to translation component further on. So there's a lot that one can do together on this. The idea is that we are all here for a common objective, and those efforts could be easily supported if there are definite proposals which can be taken, reviewed, assessed, and supported for.
Yeah, thanks, Tasleem. And would you like to take the next question as well, by Dr. Kamal Dev? What are the government of India's initiatives to slow AMR? So
very important thing, two clear aspects that we do. I think there are several initiatives in terms of government of India, which has taken. Government of India is many years back has already identified AMR as a crucial component. We have our own national action plan in conjunction or juxtaposed to the national action plan by WHO. Very importantly, last year, Government of India has also a dedicated priority pathogen list in collaboration with the WHO. At the same time, there are many policy interventions in terms of the use of antibiotics, research in antibiotics, diagnostics, use of antibiotics in agriculture, animal health, aqua, environment, surveillance. There's a lot that is going on to ensure that overall those efforts can be done. I shouldn't stop without saying that India is also a part of global efforts like Global AMR R&D Hub Group, which is we are all member to that as well, and many other efforts and collaborations with many collaborators. Like in UK, we have Indo-UK AMR Action Group. We have many efforts in the US as well. So there are many, I would say that policy level, funding level, research level, and futuristic in terms of technologies, identification level. There are several efforts in AMR. Of course, efforts of CCAM have also been supported by Government of India for tackling AMR. I'll stop here, but I just wanted to give you a quick perspective on that. Thank you.
So I think partly you already addressed Dr. Urmi Bajpayee's question here, where she wants to know that with the One Health approach, because a large share of global antibiotic consumption comes through the food animals. So I'll read out her questions. Do data and interventions include food, livestock, poultry sectors too?
Absolutely. I think One Health is a very important aspect. We all consider One Health as an important aspect. And the policies are actually already there for the use of antibiotics, pesticides in agriculture and animal, but those policies will become much more robust, much more rigorous as we go forward.
Yeah, thanks. I'd like to direct one question to Rose. You mentioned about this, the access guide and the guidelines being available to the PDs. Although you briefly covered that in your presentation, but would you like to say about how Carbex is actually seeing that the PDs are actioning it out, and how are they enabling this process for the PDs, and what is the mechanism by which the monitoring and enablement happens? So if you could just highlight that, please.
Certainly. So as companies reach those later stages of development where they're responsible for putting together a draft plan, we've only had a few companies get there yet, but we're hoping as our portfolio progresses, we'll see many more coming in shortly. We are able to link people up to other experts who may be able to provide stewardship and access guidance and help them craft these plans and think comprehensively about them. And then once they are publicly available, when they reach those triggering events, we will put them publicly up on our website. And we hope that having more example plans to turn to in addition to the development guide, this will help companies put together their own successful plans. And also we hope to continually update the development guide as we have more lessons learned to continue to provide as much guidance as possible.
And during your talk, Rose, you also mentioned the rough time frame that the PDs are given to kind of action out, and there are certain milestones that would be monitored, and compliance factors would come into play. So if I'm not wrong, you said 3 years after the launch of, after meeting the guideline, after meeting a particular milestone. But because this is a long drawn process, a lot of factors come into play. What is the timeline that you're looking at in supporting the PDs on this particular aspect, if you would like to throw some light on that?
Yeah, so for the stewardship and access plans themselves, that first draft needs to be under development when they reach pivotal clinical trials, which would generally be phase 3 or the equivalent for diagnostics. And then since we don't know the specifics of the product then, this plan is then further developed and the public version is created at the time of first regulatory approval. The 3 years you mentioned is the number of years they had to work with Wellcome Trust to come up with a joint business plan in those other territories about the mechanism to make the product available in the countries where they are not intending to market the product themselves. So we really see this as an ongoing process, and we just encourage our companies to think about this as early as possible, especially for the diagnostics, when you have to think maybe a little bit more ahead when you're coming up with the design concept to make sure it will be something that will be deployable in low resource settings.
Okay, thanks Rose for clarifying that. I see a lot of questions coming regarding the funding through CCAMP programs as well as for Carbex. I would request Meghna to kindly keep a note of all these, and we can direct our participants to the requisite resources where these questions regarding Carbex specific funding and CCAMP specific programs in AMR can be answered. My question to Dr. Tasleem, I'm just trying to kind of put together a few of the comments and the questions that have come up from the audience, and I'd like to just consolidate that into one question for you. As from an ecosystem perspective, in your opinion, what will be the key factors for success of the stewardship initiatives like the one being proposed for Carbex, and specifically talking about LMICs and in India? And there are questions coming about the One Health. I think that is something that we are increasingly discussing with in context to AMR. So what do you think are the critical factors that are going to be for the success of the stewardship programs?
Yeah, I think we all know that, largely there are many efforts being, in terms of for success of antibiotic stewardship, there are many components, and many people who are leading such an effort have clearly defined those core components, being education, leadership, in terms of compliance and so on. I think very importantly, in countries like India, while one of the key things that we have to do is a dedicated effort for antibiotic stewardship. I think we'll need champions who are completely dedicated to an effort of antibiotic stewardship and look at antibiotic stewardship from multiple angles. Something that I spoke about in my talk about our work at CCAM was from the perspective of innovations who can, which can contribute to that. And that is good, but that is not complete. We do know that. There are many other efforts that has to come together in terms of letting the hospital settings know, letting physicians know, letting the society know at large, and then building environment for better compliance. One is awareness, one is education, one is tighter regime, but environment to ensure that this is possible. You cannot have policies, but an environment which doesn't support it. So you have to provide resources to people who can then comply by that. Without any resources and alternatives, you can't expect them to suddenly change the behavior patterns. And that is very, very important. And I think those environments need to be created which are supportive, which gives you alternatives rather than gives you a kind of a target to achieve without giving the alternatives. So I think that would be very important from a perspective of ecosystem, I would say as well.
Thanks. And I think one of the questions that came up regarding the prescription or the indiscriminate use of antibiotics in healthcare should also be something that is brought into the stewardship program. I think you've covered that when you've discussed. One last question to Dr. Taslim. Because we have a lot of people here in the audience who are innovators, startups, and also a few product developers. So from that standpoint, how can they be adequately prepared to leverage such stewardship initiatives?
I think,
views.
Yeah, let me give it a shot. I may not have a complete answer, but still let me give it a shot. I would say that I think for the innovators, once they actually scan the system and be core components of the antibiotic stewardship, we mentioned the education, awareness, compliance, the technologies for compliance across for each one of the component. I think innovators have a chance to build those technologies, build platforms, build tools, which can be used by the stakeholders, by the practitioners, by society at large, which can actually convert into the larger change in terms of antibiotic stewardship. Think of it that if you build tools, platforms, and inventions which actually allow you to do that, those are easily adoptable by the system, are going to be drivers of larger change rather than the slow and steady incremental change. So technology could provide you an opportunity to exponential change even in antibiotic stewardship. And this is where the opportunity for innovators would be, according to me.
Okay, thank you for that. We're nearly at the end of our webinar. I would request Rose, if you have any concluding remarks, and then followed by Dr. Taslim for your concluding remarks, please.
Thank you. I'll just thank everybody for attending and engaging in these issues with stewardship and access. And we hope that you will continue to do so we can drive change in this area. And a special thank you to CCAMP for including us today and putting this event on.
Thank you, Rose. Dr. Taslim?
I think not much. Just for all of us who are here to remember that AMR is certainly a very big problem, and more so in India. Many things are as part of the responsible part of the society, researchers, scientists. We need to drive the message home to larger public. We need to do a lot on ourselves, not only build innovations, but also talk about it at large, and discuss it with larger good and build an advocacy to the local governments, to the larger state governments, central governments, to make a change that is much more required. That is important not only for India, but for a larger good. I think, and CCAM is absolutely keen to work with all of you. And of course, we thank support from Carbex to build those efforts together. So I think looking forward to work with you, and thank you all for joining. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the insights and information shared during this webinar would have benefited many, because we do get a lot of queries, and we hope that this webinar has been useful. I'd like to extend gratitude to Ms. Rose Garson and Dr. Taslima Arif Sayed on behalf of the team at CCAM for your valuable time and insights on this very important topic. I would also like to thank our wonderful audience for their active participation. And last but not the least, I would like to acknowledge the back-end support of my colleagues Nandita and Meghna in planning this webinar and putting it together. Till next time, take care, stay safe, and goodbye. Bye-bye.